to the live stream. Very excited because we have a guest on this week, and we're going to be talking expedition cruising, as you've probably seen. So we will certainly start off by focusing very much on the expedition questions. I know a couple of questions come in that are not expedition, and we'll get to those towards the end. But let's get going. I want to bring in straight away. So as I said, we're focusing on expedition, and I'm very excited to have Martin on. Before I bring Martin on, just a couple of bits and pieces. Remember, if you've got a question, please write the word question at the beginning so we know that it's a question, because I'm sure there might be lots of chat going on. Also, the reason I'm doing the live stream this week is my video this week is around looking at options to do Antarctica for less. So it's a video that I did in conjunction with Martin of Polar Routes. I'm going to explain Polar Routes in a second, which is a specialist travel agency. And he was very helpful to develop, and I'll talk again about it later. We developed as part of that this comparison chart, which looks at, I think it's 21 different cruise lines that go to Antarctica. They also probably go to the Arctic as well. And we'll talk about that because that's can be downloaded. I'll give you the link for that later, but also through the video. But let me bring in Martin. Hi there, Martin. How are you doing?
Hi, Gary.
Good. Well, thanks very much for joining. So Martin, maybe just to start, maybe you could just explain a little bit, introduce yourself, and talk a little bit about Polar Routes and what Polar Routes is.
Sure. Thanks, Gary. So first of all, I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here. I've followed the channel for a long time now, so to appear is a real honour. So thank you very much for having me. I have a co-founder and director of specialist travel agency that's Polar Routes, and we specialise in expedition cruising, primarily to the polar regions and beyond. I've worked in sort of the sale of expedition cruises now for over 15 years, so I've really seen the market develop, particularly in the last 5 years or so as well. And I've just come back from a cruise to Antarctica, which signed off my 150th day at sea on an expedition cruise ship. So hopefully some good expertise and knowledge there for everyone watching to help out with any questions regarding expedition cruises. And yeah, with Polar Routes, we work with 21 for Antarctica, about 23 in total with some specialist lines, 23 expedition cruise operators for primarily the polar regions, everything from, small sailing ships of 8 up to the maximum we work with is the ships that go from sort of 500 passengers with landings. So everything that we work with, there must be landings. But typically, as you've said before, Gary, the typical expedition cruise ship size of sort of between 100 and 200 passengers is most common. And yes, we work with over 21 operators. So we've got access to hundreds and hundreds of itineraries and all sorts of destinations around the world.
And the one you just back from, which I followed, was that was actually a charter. It was a whole Polar Routes charter ship. Was it 100 passengers? I can't remember. It was about 100 guests.
Well, actually, it was 66 guests in total. Right. So we went super small. So obviously, one of the developments recently in expedition cruises is ships getting a little bit larger. So typically, ships between 130 and 200 passengers now. So we knew there was a bit of demand for an under 100 and well under 100 passenger ship. So we did a charter on a ship called the MV Ushuaia. Yes, it was an amazing, we did Antarctic, Falklands and South Georgia. And it was brilliant. It was an amazing experience and so great to, we had no group landings. Everyone could get off, it's six or seven Zodiacs to get everyone off. It was super quick and lots of time ashore. And yeah, we were very fortunate, as you said on the social media, we were very fortunate with the conditions. So we had some 2 blue sky days in Antarctic Peninsula and great weather in South Georgia as well. And we also were incredibly lucky, and it still will be probably one of my expedition career highlights. We actually got to set foot on Elephant Island, which is obviously where Shackleton and his men were.
Past that, whenever I've been, we've just gone past it and then.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredibly rare to make a landing. You can quite often get a Zodiac cruise there, but because it's such an exposed piece of land, it's a very difficult place. But anyway,
Yeah.
the skies aligned and we made a landing there as well. So it was an incredibly special trip for me.
Good. Let's get into the question. There was a question I just spotted, which I think Simon had made a question. How do I get the video link? I think Simon, I don't know if you're talking about this live stream. If you've got the live stream, hope you've now seen it. If you're talking about this week's video, there is actually, if you're on YouTube, in the description notes for this live stream, there is a link to the video, but it's also on the channel. If you go on my channel, it will be there under the video section, but I will also, but there is a link there. And if you're watching the live stream on Facebook or on LinkedIn, I'll put the link there afterwards, but it should be there on the channel. So Martin, let's get stuck into the questions. Lots coming in. So there's quite a lot around fitness, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, what you can see where are some lines the same. But starting off with Rosemary, who is, Rosemary's done quite a few expedition around the world, quite exotic stuff, often smaller ships, some of the stuff you were talking about. So is always looking for kind of new itineraries. So she's asked the question, are there any expedition cruises that go to Hans Island? I must admit, I've never heard of it before, which is on Canadian-Greenland border. Ponant had cruises that went there, but I don't see it listed on their website anymore. I guess Ponant do have some quite interesting things that they only maybe do once or twice. So offhand, Martin, do you know anything that you can answer on that one?
Yeah, so it's right up in the north, and what? So I was sort of probably I'm going to have to come back to Rosemary and look at this specifically because it's quite a unique place, but it's right up in the north, and so I was wondering whether some Northwest Passage ones would sort of go through, but it's actually sort of not on that route. Now, Ponant, as Rosemary correctly says, either last year or the year before, did a very northern northern Canada into northern Greenland itinerary. Which probably, yes, would have called in at Hans Island, but that was quite a unique itinerary, and it's not the sort of most common tread path for most expedition cruise lines for various reasons, operating and ice conditions, I'm imagining, up there potentially. So Ponant aren't running that same one this year, but what they tend to do, Ponant, is if they've got a very interesting specialist one and it has had interest, they'll tend to run it potentially every other year or every 3 years. So I can make some inquiries with Ponant to see whether that's coming back around in their program in future departures. I know that AE Expeditions did quite a northerly one, but I don't think Hans Island was specifically named. And obviously, as you said before, Expedition Cruise doesn't necessarily give names of places it will definitely visit, but I'd be interested to see if that's going up that way. So there's an AE Expeditions one that I would probably have a look at as well, but that is one I'm going to probably have to take away and come back to Rosemary.
Well, great. Maybe Martin, if you come back to me and Rosemary, once Martin's had a thing, I'll kind of either connect you or I'll pass it on to Rosemary. Great, thanks for that. So there's a couple of questions here. I'll bring them up, both of them, Martin, because they're sort of linked in a way, not quite, but sort of linked. They're around fitness. So ArtQuest has the question, I'll be 80 when I start my Hurtigruten cruise to Antarctica this November. Very nice. Any advice on what kind of training I should emphasize to be ready? I like they're getting expedition ready, or skip the training in favor of a less strenuous itinerary. And then Megan has asked a question, which is more about disability, I guess, but how fit do you need to be to make an expedition cruise worthwhile? I have MECFS, which means sometimes I don't have much energy. Are there some lines better than others for disability? So, Martin, any thoughts on the terms of fitness overall for expedition?
Yeah, so I think with regards to fitness, if you're the kind of person that goes walking and you can walk, if you go walking in the countryside or in the hills or the mountains, depending on where you live, you're going to have no problem on most expedition cruises. So even on more active expedition cruises, there will still be a choice of things to do. So that you can, for example, if you're not, you can stay near the beach, observe the wildlife. You can obviously be in amongst the penguins and take it fairly easily. And then there will also be choices to go off and do a walk. And depending on the size of the ship and the program, it might even be that there's a medium walk option and a strenuous walk option. So, and you can dip in and out of that as much as you wish. So for just talking general fitness. So, if one day you want to do the strenuous hike, the next day you might just stay by the beach and you can just mix and match that as you wish. So I do think in terms of training, I think if you, if you do want to be active, I think you want to be able to do a walk, and it's obviously also going to be over uneven surfaces as well. So you just sort of want to make sure, for example, take walking poles with you. But someone like Hurtigruten, I'm not sure which ship it's on. So if it's on the Fram, it's about 230, 40 people. But if it's on the Roald Amundsen or the Nansen, it will actually be sort of in the four to 500s, and Hurtigruten, or HX as they're now known, have a really wide-ranging program. So I don't think there will be an issue of you sort of mixing and matching in what you want. And then they also offer Zodiac cruises, I know, as a second activity, and obviously that just involves sitting there taking pictures. So I definitely think it's worth doing some walking and getting your sort of general fitness up. But then what I would recommend is that you pick the activities, and if you're not sure, then go for the sort of easier activities and build up. Don't sort of come out on day one and go, let's go for the strenuous hike, because some of those hikes are pretty strenuous. So go sort of build it up, and if you do the medium one, you think that was easy, then great, go for the strenuous one next time. And I think that's the way to sort of build it up.
Yeah, I mean, certainly on all the ones I've been on them, you're right. They will say if you step one is along the beach, there'll be these penguins or seals or whatever. Stay along the beach or near close by. Then there's plan B, which is up to that level, and then for the diehard, like the reactor ones, and you're right, it's so you always get to see stuff, and I guess also depending on the itinerary, there may be a lot, as you're saying, Zodiac cruising stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the disability, I have two of the trips I've been on, there have actually been people who are wheelchair bound. They've gone often with their family, and obviously they haven't been able to get out much, but the cruise lines have always tried to make sure that at one point they find a way of getting them to stand on land. They obviously, when it's a very calm bay or something, but they've kind of gone that way to make sure that even people in wheelchair who can't do any of the walking along the beach stuff, they've at least touched land once, and they've been pretty good at, or they've taken them out on some of the Zodiac cruising and stuff. And I guess there's the advantage of the smaller ships, they will try and help. So good.
It's worth, if someone is wheelchair bound, it is worth us checking out, because you do want a cruise line that's actually going to do that. So we have we know that there are better cruise lines that are more willing to do that. And I think just the other note on that is that you do also have to appreciate that you will need to be sort of handled in and out of the Zodiac and potentially on an offshore. So that's the only other thing that I would.
Yeah, it's a very physical kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's the only thing. But yeah, you can absolutely do it, and there are cruise lines that will certainly do that for you. But I think the first question was, they said they were 80. The oldest person on my last cruise was 92, and they were fitter than I were. So age is no obstacle.
Yeah. So one's got a question on what options are there to do the Northwest Passage? Are there many options, or is it a pretty limited because when there's a narrow window of time?
Yeah, so it's definitely during the summer, just for the timing, obviously, for the ice and the passage to be able to get through. And then you've got two kind of options. You have got some cruises that will go into the Northwest Passage, but perhaps not make a full transit, and they'll come back out and they'll sort of go in and sort of come back out, and it becomes perhaps more of a northern Canada with a sort of a beginning of the Northwest Passage itinerary, and then you then also have the full transit. And I think most people, when they think of Northwest Passage, are sort of thinking about the full transit. But so, there are ships that go through. I think you've got HX go through, AE Expeditions go through. I think need to check Ponant go through as well. So there are more options.
Seabourn as well. Seabourn was offering one at one point. Yeah.
Yes, I did. Yeah, I did see Seabourn in there as well. So there is, but it's normally only once per ship, and normally potentially as part of a repositioning over to, I guess, Alaska and down that side. So it's normally only once per ship. The biggest common advice, so with the Northwest Passage, it's generally about 30 days, give or take a bit. And that is actually one of the areas that we advise considering a slightly larger ship. So something like HX, which they go through on the Nansen or the Amundsen. because 30 days, if you're on a small ship with one restaurant and maybe one bar and lectures, it isn't going to be like a regular expedition cruise to Antarctica where you're landing twice a day. There is a lot of miles to cover, and so therefore there is landings throughout the voyage, but it's not going to be twice a day. There are even going to be days where the main activity is standing on deck and observing the scenery. So a slightly larger ship can offer, if you think of 30 days in the same restaurant, the Nansen and Amundsen, for example, have 3 restaurants, and that just mixes it up a little bit. But of course, it then means when you actually make a landing, it will be slower. So it's one area just to consider that your ship will probably be more important than, for example, if you go to Antarctica and you've got 2 landings a day, and really your main focus is about being on land. Or exploring as much as possible. But yes, there's definitely options. They do sell out very quickly because the program doesn't tend to be that big. But yes, there's definitely some options that we can have a look at for you. And in terms of the 2, I think you've advised us before, Gary. I would say if you're going to go do the Northwest Passage, I would definitely recommend the full transit.
Yeah, it sounds. Yeah, it's one that I keep looking at. It's like, yeah. Here's someone who's clearly watched the video and downloaded the thing. So Dean here. And it's quite an interesting one because so in that document that I mentioned earlier, which you can download, let me bring that up just to remind people who've joined. So we've created this document here, which again splits all of the cruise lines into ultra luxury, premium, budget, etc. And Eli Dean spotted that actually World Explorer appears twice, once under Atlas and once under Quark. Do you want to explain why? Or should I explain why?
Yeah, absolutely. Good spot, Dean, I have to say. So that ship basically is operating for Antarctica for Quark, and it's operating for other times of the year for Atlas. Plus, I think Atlas still have it for this season, although obviously now this Antarctic season is almost at an end now. So at the moment, that ship is used by 2 cruise lines at different times of the year. It's not actually the only ship that gets used by 2 different cruise lines at the end of the different times of the year. So, for example, the Sea Venture, which is now actually changing this season, but the Sea Venture for Polar Latitude is used by them in Antarctica, and it's used by Adventure Canada in summer. So ships do sometimes move between operators. In terms of the nuts and bolts of the ship, obviously it's the same. So that in some ways is great. But the team, obviously, that are operating the expeditions and how the expedition is focused and how they sort of get guests on and off the ship. Obviously, that experience will be different depending on the cruise line that is operating the vessel at that time. But the quick answer is yes, it's the same ship is used by 2 different companies.
And actually, Dean, Quark there's one of their ships which they're swapping the World Explorer in for is going to Windstar. Just as an aside, we were talking about Hurtigruten and Hurtigruten expeditions. Just to point out is that the companies have split completely now, and they're actually owned by different people. So Hurtigruten is owned by one set of private equity based in London, and HX Expeditions is owned by a different set of private equity in London. Because I've just been doing a big exercise on ownership. And Hurtigruten, I guess, had some financial challenges with everything. I don't know what quite happened there. And then they had different share owners who were private equity, and they've split the 2 companies. So now it's called Hurtigruten, which is the Norway sailings, and HX Expeditions, which now does the expedition stuff. So, I think the management, from what I read, moved across. The management, the actual operating team, as it were, are the same. That's stayed the same as I understand it.
Yeah, right? I think the confusion with it has become because obviously the heritage HX have sort of held on to for a couple of years. It being now sort of in a hybrid state called HX Hurtigruten Expeditions, which actually I sort of understand because the teams have come across, but I think it actually presents more confusing. But I believe they have now gone. They are now HX, and then Hurtigruten is, and they're painting their ships next year as well, so they won't look like Hurtigruten ships anymore. So I think very quickly, I think the HX will become a bit.
So I mean, I know all the website and everything now. It is different. You can see that quite rapidly, sort of differentiating. Lance asking the question: any Antarctic cruises that go to South Georgia, and also areas that we can see the emperor penguins on the same cruise? So I guess because South Georgia, you're not going to see emperor penguins. Emperor penguins are right down in the south. Are there any that go to the same thing? I haven't seen them.
There's one that you could have a chance, or there's a couple that you could have a chance, but one of them is the Ponant's Charcot, the icebreaker ship. So the Charcot runs a Weddell Sea Explorer and South Georgia itinerary, which actually I went on about 3 years ago. And we were very lucky. We did see 12 emperor penguins in the Weddell Sea, and then we went to South Georgia and obviously saw the king penguins up there. But we could very easily have not seen emperor penguins because the time there is not when the nests breeding season, they're all together. It was just that we saw them on an ice floe, so we were quite sort of lucky in that respect. Also, obviously, depending on budget, the Charcot is Ponant's flagship, so it's also probably one of the most expensive options.
Yeah, it's
really ocean-wide, I have also seen, I've been exploring the Weddell Sea quite a bit, and I don't know, I'd have to specifically look if they've got a Weddell Sea and South Georgia Explorer, but that could offer you the chance to see them. My general advice, if one of those two options is not available or budget's not there, is I would probably split those trips into, because if you want to see emperor penguins, a couple of the operators, so Quark being one, Oceanwide being another, they run specific emperor penguin Snow Hill itineraries, and what they do is they bring the ship as far as they can, and then they use helicopters. So it's the helicopters on the Ultramarine or the Ortelius takes helicopters, and they then helicopter you into into Snow Hill to actually see the colony, and that takes place earlier in the season. That's your only guaranteed, almost guaranteed way to see emperor penguins really on that specific itinerary. For most other itineraries, it's going to be a bit of a chance of luck as to whether you see them or not. So really, if emperor penguins is focused, then we would go on a Snow Hill emperor penguin specific expedition. If it's for South Georgia itself, obviously you've got a multitude of cruises that go to Antarctic, Falklands, and South Georgia, and any of those that go to South Georgia for more than a couple of days, you're gonna see plenty of king penguins in South Georgia, and that's the season as well.
South Georgia is just so amazing.
Oh yeah,
amazing. Tom asking the question. Had a great time on Lindblad National Geographic's Galapagos cruise. How do their Antarctic and Arctic cruise offerings rate? Pro and cons. Now, I haven't been on Lindblad National Geographic. I've met people who speak very highly of them. And I've seen, I guess their ships are quite different. I've seen their ship, with Endurance, I think Endurance, I think. Just got that modern kind of, a bit like AE Expeditions kind of thing. So from your perspective, and your clients and stuff, how do they rate Lindblad National Geographic? Is it one that you kind of recommend for people? And what sort of people do you recommend it for?
Yeah, so Lindblad National Geographic, I think, are probably one of the most reliable in terms of what they're going to deliver in terms of their experience on board. So if you had a great time in the Galapagos, then I would absolutely wholeheartedly recommend that. I'm sure you'll have a great time in Antarctic and the Arctic with them as well. The interesting thing with Lindblad, the thing that varies is their ships. Their ships, for example, in Antarctica, they've got some quite new, 2 new ships over there. Whereas actually the Galapagos, I think, is a slightly older vessel over there. So I would probably say if you enjoyed the Galapagos experience with them on an older vessel, then obviously coming to a newer vessel, actually, would probably only be benefits in terms of that. But they're very National Geographic. Lindblad, very good. They always have excellent expertise on board. They have the National Geographic Association as well, so that just adds an extra element to things like the photography on board. There'll be a photographer from National Geographic, which doesn't mean you come away with a load of National Geographic images, because obviously they keep them for themselves, but it's interesting. They're interesting to talk to. They're interesting for any tips and tricks and stuff that you should need. So it adds a really nice, interesting element to it as well. But great expedition teams, Geographic. Great. If you had a great time, one of the most reliable brands, I think you'll find the experience in the Arctic and Antarctic excellent with them as well.
Good. You were freezing a bit there, but your audio it was fine. So that you were freezing a bit, but we could hear your audio fine there, Martin. So it's like, so I think hopefully people just stick with it because the audio is perfectly fine. So there was this is probably a yes or no question that I can give an answer to. Michael asking, do you plan on booking a Viking expedition cruise just so you can compare them all? I haven't got any plans to book a Viking expedition cruise. I've seen the ships, which look very beautiful, but they're also slightly a little bit, they are slightly bigger ships than I like. I like to go on the smallest because I think Viking is at 400. You might know offhand, Martin. I can't remember how big it is. Is it 400 or 500 or something? So my understanding is
400.
Right. So they would have fewer landings, would they, or fewer landing sites they can go to because of the greater numbers. Is that right? Would I be right with that?
Yeah. So Viking is a softer. I would describe Viking as a slightly softer expedition, but compensated by the fact obviously the ship has more in the way of perhaps what you may describe as traditional cruise facilities. Obviously Viking is a bit of a niche product in that respect, but yes, you're probably realistically going to get one landing a day when you're down there in Antarctica, and that may only be for an hour, maybe an hour and a half, depending on how full the ship is and how many rotations they have to do. Because obviously, if you remember, you can only have 100 people on land at the same time. So if that ship is full at, I think it's 380, I think you're talking 4 groups that need to be cycled through. They do generally offer a secondary activity. They have that sort of quite fancy boat that sort of goes up and down the sort of the ramp at the back. They do sort of some scenic cruising off that as a secondary activity. And so I kind of would recommend it if you are perhaps looking for a sort of, if you come from cruise and you're looking at expedition and you're not sure whether you want to take the full leap to start sort of moving around in Zodiacs twice a day, then it could be a good option. But if you are looking at a sort of expedition and you want to be doing, 2 landings a day, then there is definitely a sort of a con that you have to weigh up on that particular ship. It's going to probably be 1 a day, maybe an additional activity. Yeah. So that, yeah, if there's pros and cons, and I know people that is enough. You're going to get off the ship, you'll be in amongst the penguins, you then on the ship, you're very comfortable, and you've got some great sort of more cruise-like, I suppose, facilities. But if your focus is to be on land, then personally I would keep to under 200 and go for one that is going to give you the possibility of 2 landings a day. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I mean, the ships look amazing. I mean, I was in Ushuaia once, and the ships look beautiful. And you're right, the advantage, you have all the more cruisy stuff they do with the different choices, the dining and the stuff. So Ken, I have is asking a question which I do have quite a strong view on. Going to Viking to Antarctica in November, very nice. Trying to decide just to use our iPhone for pics or take a large digital camera. I know a few people have asked. 100% take your better camera. I think you will get super pictures with your iPhone, but it will drive you crazy. That you can't get up close, and particularly if you're seeing whales, your iPhone will, because the whales will maybe quite far away. But one of the things, if you look at my Antarctica videos, and also the one that's linked to this sort of live stream that we're doing, the best photos were taken with a camera where it had a zoom on, because you can get up, close with the face of the seals, and also, bear in mind, particularly if you have to keep certain distances away, but you can still get really nice close shots. So on my last trip, I went, lots and lots of people using iPhone, and then they would see my pictures and they're like, oh my goodness, I wish I'd brought a camera with more of a zoom. Now, obviously, as the zoom gets better on iPhone, that helps a bit and stuff, but I would absolutely take a better camera with a zoom. So it's more about the zoom, to be honest, than anything else, because obviously the quality on iPhone's pretty good, particularly if you've got like the iPhone 16. But I would strongly recommend it. And I did see travel agent Sarah making some comments there. The other thing to bear in mind, quite correctly, is make sure, of course, you've got gazillions of SD cards, because you will take 10 billion pictures. And make sure you've got lots and lots of batteries, because batteries do run down quite quickly in the cold. And also, just if you're on one of the cruises where you're going out, if you're on Viking, if they're doing the Zodiac thing and you're coming back and doing landing, you may not have time to charge batteries. So just make sure you're kind of loaded up with those two. I'm guessing you agree with that, Martin, or do you?
I wholeheartedly agree. The other thing I think you don't get out of an iPhone or whatever mobile phone is I don't think you get the detail level that you can get out of a digital camera. Like if you see those really stunning pictures of a penguin head, for example, and you've got the detail of the feathers, you just don't get that detail out of iPhones. Now, it's not to say that if you're not into photography, I would a hugely expensive digital camera just to go if photography is not your thing. But if you are kind of asking the question and you're weighing up whether to take the camera or not, then take the camera, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I think you don't need a massive zoom, unlike if you're going to the Arctic, in my experience, there, because the distance from polar bears, you do need a really big zoom. So I have, because they're very expensive, but I have one because I bought it when I went to Arctic. I wouldn't go out and buy a big zoom lens for your digital camera, but if you've got some zoom, that makes a big difference. But you don't need the big zoom, the big zoom. That would be a lot. And even on my last trip, someone that I knew had actually rented a big zoom lens, and they hadn't used it. They didn't use it at all. I just noticed Martin's actually dropped out of the. I guess maybe his Wi-Fi dropped, but hopefully he'll come back in. So Fraser. I brought Fraser up. Great to see you. I'm so delighted you remind me. So Fraser, who's Fraser from Fraser at Sea. He was due to fly on Friday from Heathrow to Miami. Of course, I think most people know, Heathrow was completely and utterly closed down. And he managed, luckily, to go this very convoluted route via Frankfurt, I think it was. So I was really pleased to see that you made it. So Martin is back. So you got booted.
Sorry, Gary.
But okay. But your Wi-Fi is sort of freezing a lot, so I guess you probably had a funny connection. So hopefully you're back and whatever. So Sarah was saying, actually, by the way, also Martin, that Hans Island, she thinks albatross can do that as well. So, but you're going to come back to us for the question that thing. So let's have a look. So KY. How does Ponant compare to Silver Sea or Seabourn in the ultra-luxury category? Gary did say the food is not great and it's very French, so it's good to understand how they compare. Maybe I'll start on this one, Martin, because I've been on all three. I haven't been on Seabourn to Antarctica, but I've been on expedition. I mean, they're all very, very close in reality. They're all luxurious. They all have great ships. And particularly, as Martin was saying earlier, I haven't been on the Commandant Charcot. I've been on their more sister ships things. I mean, in terms of the food, I'd expected Ponant to have incredible food, being French and whatever, and the food was just okay. To be honest, when I was on Seabourn, but I did the Kimberley, the food was kind of okay, but I think they know that and have addressed it. But they are very, very similar. So a lot of it comes down to preference. I mean, you need to bear in mind, if you're going on Ponant, in my experience anyway, you may have 80%, 90% of the ship could be French. So you just need to be comfortable that you're going to be in a more multilingual environment. Obviously, Silver Sea and Seabourn, it's in English. Now, if you have a bigger group on, so for example, when I was on Silver Sea recently, feels not that recent, but they had a big Chinese group on, so they had some specific Chinese guides on to then, expedition team to take them out. So if they've got a big enough group, they will cater for that. But it's pretty much in English. So you need to be very comfortable. What Ponant did is they would split out, on my particular one, I think it was 15 English speakers. Most of them were part of a big group. So they would run separate lectures for us in English and in French, to the French group separately. However, I have been on others where if it's a much smaller group, they may just do translation. I don't know if that's your experience as well, but I did know that they told me on some of their smaller ones, if there's like 3 or 4 English speakers, they will translate, rather than do separate lectures. So you just need to kind of, that's one thing to consider, but they were great. I personally really like Silver Sea because they've been doing expedition for a long time. They have a great expedition team, but they're all very close. A lot of it hinges around, I guess, personal preference. The thing that I like about Seabourn is their 2 ships are all new. Silver Sea has Silver Cloud and Silver, I can't remember the other one, which is older. Then of course they have the Endeavours, which is newer. So it's important to choose the right ship. Again, Ponant has the older sister ships, and they have the newer one. So it's also, a lot of it comes back to the ship experience. as well, because I think you're going on Silver Sea on Endeavour is much nicer than going on Silver Sea and Silver Cloud. So it's a lot of kind of that. This ship's important. Is there anything you wanted to add, or anything you do or find that your clients find between Ponant, Silver Sea, Seabourn, or you direct certain people towards one of those three?
Yeah, I think the with Ponant, I think the one thing that I would say with Ponant, because obviously you're right, it is a mainly French cruise line, and there is going to be split language, if you like. Now, I think for Antarctica specifically, generally they normally have enough English speakers on board, and what happens is they actually you get an English program, and the French speakers get a French program, and it's almost like you just sort of coexist actually within the same. But you don't. We haven't had experience of people having translated lectures in Antarctica or the Arctic, to be honest. But if you go somewhere more, if you go to one of their more special, a destination that's perhaps not quite so big in the UK speaking markets, then yes, you could end up with getting what you want. For me, the big thing with Ponant is their ships are capped at 199 passengers, which makes them a Category 1 ship. And that means that it's two rotations, if you like, for landings. And therefore, I think out of the three, Silver Sea and Seabourn and Ponant, I think Ponant is the cruise line that gives you perhaps a more active and perhaps more time on shore. Whereas Silver Sea and Seabourn now, I think excluding the Silver Endeavour, their ships are over 200. In fact, I think some of the Silver Sea ships are now 270. I think the Seabourn is 250 something. So you're now into potentially if that ship is running full, you're into 3 rotations per landing. So they still advertise 2 landings per day, but you may, if it's a full ship, be down to sort of 45 minutes, under an hour, because you've got 3 rotations to do in a 3 to 4 hour slot. So I think if being on land, if the exploration side is really key, then I think Ponant capping its ships at 199 does have a significant advantage. I've travelled with Ponant myself. I know obviously that you have as well, Gary. I was lucky to be on the Charcot, which if you want the ultimate luxury ship, then the Charcot, I'm afraid, is it. But obviously that's one ship, and the majority of Ponant's is out of the sister ships, which are also very nice. I think your comments about the food are fair. I thought it was good. I've had dinner on the ships before. It was good. But yeah, I think because it's sort of French, you maybe go with a slightly elevated expectation, which sometimes I think leads. But for me, we work quite closely with Ponant. We have lots of great feedback about it. I think for our Antarctica and Arctic, you're generally going to be pretty safe that there will be a number of English-speaking people on there. But it's a consideration. Also, I tend to find Ponant's fares a little bit lower than Silver Sea and Seabourn, particularly their early booking offers, and they're also very good for solos. I think out of the 3 for solo passengers, their deals are very good as well. Yeah. So there are some big pluses, but yes, it is something to consider.
That was a good link into the question from Sherry. It was the solo supplement, because certainly, Ponant, certainly when they launch, I've normally seen pretty solo supplements. So are there any other lines that you find are pretty good with the no solo supplement? I guess based on my experience, because I've done all of them solo, it's normally been early season, end of season, and it's Ponant and Silver Sea have sometimes had them, sometimes haven't had them. I got a Seabourn, which had Kimberley ones, but they were doing it because I think they just launched Kimberley, wasn't that busy. But if people are looking for solo deals, what is their best way in? And there's another question a little bit later where someone talks about the sharing cabin option of driving price down, but maybe we'll talk about solo first, and we'll come back to that later.
So good cruise lines for me for solos is Ponant. I think they have a lot of good solo deals. I think Silver Sea can have solo deals, but not normally until it's a bit closer to the time, and it tends to be quite specific, whereas Ponant tend to have very good deals when they early release, so that's probably a good one to look at. AE Expeditions, now they've capped their ships at 136, now offer 10 solo cabins per ship per voyage. So again, if you're into early booking, then that would probably be another one to have a look at as well. Quark also have solo cabins on the Ultramarine, although the Ultramarine is probably the highest price point of their 3 ships. So there's three. Those are three places that I would direct someone to have a look at. But from our perspective, but we often we know where all the solo deals are, because different cruise lines will release solo deals at different times, and we know where they all are. So whether it's with ourselves or whether it's with another agent, I think that is where an agency can probably come into its own, in that they will know where the solo deals are at the time of inquiry, because it's something that's getting better, I suppose, but still probably isn't where it should be in terms of solo pricing, I think. But we know how to. Hapag-Lloyd, is another one. They tend to have 25% solo supplements. That's another one that we tend to have a look at quite frequently for solo travelers. So I think an agency can come into their own there by looking at what's actually available. But those four, Ponant, AE, Quark, and Hapag-Lloyd, are probably four to have a look at that I know do have some solo.
Which I think that's right, because I think when I did the Hapag-Lloyd through you to the Canadian Arctic and stuff, I think it was that was a solo, and there was a couple of solos on that. So with the solo deals, Martin, is it because basically there's so few of them that they would tend to release those through agents rather than advertise them? Because often, with the big lines, I always say to people, like, just if you follow, if you subscribe to the email newsletters, you'll often find if solo deals are coming out, like Crystal, for example, is doing lots of solo deals, and they just pump those out through their kind of marketing email newsletters. With Expedition, do they tend to sort of not blast out an email? They'll tend to work through agents with solos. Is that why you're saying you kind of know where they are more? I'm just saying, if people want to keep up with solo, like Sherry wants to know where the solo deals are, is it best to then be working with an agent?
I think so, yeah. The problem, I think, with Expedition is the capacity of the ship, isn't it? Because the inventory is obviously a huge amount less. And so I think what tends to happen, I think, is I think when it gets to, I'm not sure the exact theory, but I guess it must get to a point where they're looking at the occupancy for the season, and if it's perhaps not quite where they want it to be, then they will perhaps encourage things like solo deals and things. So we tend to find that it sort of they tend to come in sometimes at different points, but the sort of cruise lines we've mentioned are kind of quite reliable. For example, and as I said, AE now have 10 per voyage. So as soon as that season's released, there's 10 solo cabins now that are available. But yeah, there are plenty of cruise lines where people will be paying 25% or less solo supplement, but it's not something that I could say if you go and check it today, I know it will be there. So sometimes it's there for a bit, and sometimes it's not. And I think regardless of the agency that you book through, you shouldn't pay any. I mean, certainly with us, you don't pay any more than you would pay the cruise line. So having someone looking at all that for you, who knows the market and knows where the solo deals, will probably save you a lot of time. And even if you inquire today and there isn't a solo deal available, you can leave the inquiry with them, so that if something comes out, they can then recontact you afterwards. So, but yeah, we deal a lot with solos, and very rarely does someone need to pay over 25%, unless it's a specific, very, for example, that Emperor Penguin Snow Hill Island itinerary probably isn't going to be solo deals on something as specific unusual, as that. Yeah. But apart from a few things, it's we can normally do pretty well for solo travel.
So let's move on to a couple of questions around kind of the sort of the impact of the environment and stuff. It's from Stein Valchen, and he's got a couple of questions bundled. So I'll pull up the questions and we'll focus on, because he's got two questions built into one, I think. So the first question is, any of the lines that we talk about, the 21 lines, I guess, and have the best environmental commitment? We'll come to the money thing separate, because he's got a follow-up question. Based on our experiences, how quickly is climate change affecting the scenery? Thinking of doing a short one earlier or more complete one a few years later. Okay, so from your perspective, what are you seeing or hearing, or what is your views on terms of, are there any lines that have a better kind of environmental commitment? My understanding is they all have to follow the IATA rules, but I don't know that for sure. You'll know better. And then what impact do you think it's having on scenery, and what's the general thinking in the community? Because obviously, as well as Polar Route, you run I think you've run the Expedition network, is that what it's
That's what, yeah, the Expedition Cruise Network. So which is just gives. I'm the chair, so it's a B2B organization. So I guess just from viewers' perspective is that, but it means I work with more cruise lines than just we deal with at Polar Routes. I guess is probably the main benefit. In terms of environmental. That you're absolutely right. So any operator that goes to Antarctica has to be a member, should be, and it's a voluntary thing, but all of them that do expeditions are members of IARTO, and IARTO do, I think, a great job at regulating to make sure that obviously the ships are going in a responsible way, that things like wildlife is respected and minimum distances are observed. They've been great when circumstances have changed and things have need to be put into place, and they've got a way of getting that out and getting action very quickly. So I think that looks after the sort of environmental concerns that most people would have going to a destination like Antarctica, and for the Arctic, for example, ACO is a different organisation, but principally they do similar things in for the Arctic as well. So I think that looks after what I think most people would be concerned about. Interestingly, on your video you mentioned about the big cruise lines where you won't get off at all. They are not members of IARTO, interestingly, and on my recent voyage I won't name the cruise line, but we turned up at our landing site and there was a large cruise line sitting in the bay, and we had to radio them to move, and they only moved once they decided they were done. So it was quite interesting just to see if that had been an IARTO member, there would have been a regulatory sort of pushback on that. But anyway, that's beside the point. In terms of cruise lines that are at the forefront of it, so all cruise lines going to Antarctica will follow IARTO regulations, and that covers, I think, most that want to know. But those that are at the forefront, there would be two for me. The first would be HX. I think they've done they're one of the biggest cruise lines, and I guess with bigger cruise lines, you've got bigger budgets, which means you can spend the money to lead the way in things to do with sustainability that cost money, essentially. So they were one of the first cruise lines to ban single-use plastics throughout their entire operation, from obviously the drinks in the bar even through to the single plastic use in the kitchens and beyond. They're currently testing electric Zodiac operations. That's another thing that they're doing. They've got a new concept for a ship with zero emissions. So and they have an incredible onboard science centre that goes on all of their ships, but particularly on the Nansen and the Amundsen, and they do some great work there as well for citizen science as well. So I think they are probably one of the sort of leaders of things, and very often things that happen there tend to filter down to the rest. And then the other one for me would be AE Expeditions, or Aurora Expeditions if you're in the States, or it's AE in the UK and Aurora everywhere else. They are the first B Corp certified cruise line, or expedition cruise line. And that means they've been through a very rigorous process, I guess, in order to achieve that B Corp accreditation. And I think I think that they are the first cruise line to achieve that status, which means that sustainability sits at the very forefront of what they do. Where I think AE potentially have the edge is because their ships are smaller, and it feels 130 feels better, whereas obviously HX's ships are a bit larger, and the Amundsen and Nansen are up to 400 to 500 people. Which again is that more softer expedition side. But those would be the two that I think are probably leading the way, if you like. But I do think all members of IARTO look after those environmental credentials very well.
I just want this is a sort of a question, which is a little bit further down when we're talking about environment. So Anthony's asked the question: how do you feel about lines that use noisy helicopters in sensitive areas, potentially disturbing wildlife? Personally, I'm really surprised that people do it, but I'm sure it's very popular. But it was interesting. I know in Silver Sea, Board Endeavour from Crystal, they got rid of the helicopters, and partly because they build more cabins as well. But they also didn't want to use it. But I guess there's a few that use them. Quark, Scenic uses them. Can't remember who else uses them. So I think I'm very surprised that even IARTA allows them to use helicopters. But I don't know if you have a view or you don't want to comment.
I think we'll probably agree with you a little bit. I think they are regulated by IATA, and they are only allowed to fly over areas where that they have. If they're going to fly over wildlife, it has to be at a height that I guess is not disturbing to the wildlife that's on there. And as I said, we've actually mentioned, for example, Oceanwide and Quark have those Snow Hill Island itineraries, whereby you need the helicopter. You can't get Snow Hill without a helicopter. So there's a sort of purpose, I guess, to that as well. For me, I think there is an environmental consideration, but I think that would probably be looked after by IATA in its operation. But for me, it's the landing of the helicopters on and off the ship, and that is actually, if you've got a balcony underneath the helipad, you're going to know about it.
I did watch a video. I think it was on Scenic. It was like, first of all, it looked kind of scary because the landing bay was really small. But I remember thinking, like, yeah, it's just, for me, one of the magical things about Antarctica is just that quietness and the peaceful, and it's so, seems pristine and quiet, and then you've got the helicopter going. It just seems, I mean, I'm sure it's incredibly beautiful because I've seen some of the videos from stuff. I just feel like I'm just really surprised it's done. But I guess it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's a no for me, as they say.
I wouldn't choose an Antarctic cruise on a helicopter myself. I think if it's because you want to do a helicopter, I think, I wouldn't choose a cruise on that basis. But yeah, you covered it, Gary.
So we didn't actually quite answer Steinwald Madchen's question. So in terms of the scenery, I mean, certainly when I've been on board, both the Arctic and Antarctica, I mean, obviously there's a lot of talks around the impact in the different regions of climate change. And we get shown a lot around, the ice spread and stuff. And I think I saw some in the press that were talking about the ice this year again for a couple of years in a row is smaller than it was, but it is kind of changeable. And obviously you've got the massive, enormous iceberg that broke off and is now kind of stuck outside South Georgia. I mean, it's hard because I've only been within the space of a few years, but from your perspective, Bon, is the scenery changing a lot? I mean, is it noticeable if you were going to go like now and in 5 years' time? Are people seeing a difference? Is it that dramatic? I know when I went to the Arctic, when we went to Svalbard, I mean, you could see that. I mean, the guys on the ship were telling us, "Here's my picture from when I did my contract 5 years ago. Here's from 3 years ago. Here's today." You could see, the retreat of the glaciers. In Antarctica, is it the same? Are people seeing the difference?
I think it's less obvious. There is definitely effects, and your guides and your expedition team will be able to show you. But I think it's less obvious to probably us that are going, because Antarctica, it's having just come back, there's still incredible ice, incredible icebergs. Everything's covered in snow, and yes, there is some difference in glaciers, but I do think it's less obvious. But your guide will tell you and be able to show you some instances of where it definitely has changed. I think it is more obvious in the Arctic, with Svalbard in particular. Obviously, a lot of Svalbard, if you're going anything from sort of mid-June and onwards, obviously there's a lot of rock, and it's not all snow covered from sort of middle of June onwards. And then I think it's more stark, where you can see the valley that glaciers used to sit in and where they're sitting now. But that's obviously also, there's many parts of the world that have that same story, if you like. The other thing that I think with Svalbard is the sea ice. So I remember when I first started expedition cruising 15 years ago, there used to be a real you used to only circumnavigate Svalbard much later in the season, because quite often the sea ice would prevent a ship being able to fully circumnavigate. And these days you can circumnavigate Svalbard pretty much from anything from mid-June onwards. So that's an effect that I've noticed. The other effect that I did discover this time, there's two in Antarctica where there is a bit of an effect. The first is Adelie penguins are moving further south in the peninsula. And when we were on this voyage, we only saw Adelie penguins once, and not many of them actually. There was a Gen 2 colony with some Adelies in it, and I was told that's because the Adelies who basically live on snow and ice have moved further south. So again, that could be a reason to perhaps do a voyage that goes south of the Antarctic Circle, just to sort of give yourself a better chance of seeing that. And the second effect I have seen is less seals on ice floes. I remember 15 years ago on my first Antarctic cruise, there was seals on ice floes everywhere. And this time there was still some seals on ice floes, but certainly nowhere near what I remember. I remember they used to be absolutely everywhere. Right. So there's a wildlife effect a little bit, but equally, whales currently are having the populations are, they think, up to and around what they were before the whaling started, and definitely this voyage we saw whales everywhere, and that's a great. In fact, it got to the point which sounds awful, but people were, when there was whale sightings, people started to want to know how far away they were.
On that.
And that's a great story.
Yeah.
So I have seen a wildlife change. I think in the scenery it's less obvious in Antarctica, but in the Arctic,
I remember there was a talk. We had the talk about that. I remember the talk about the penguin. They were showing up. Penguins are having to move further and further, like down. I think you're right. That does remind it. This is actually about the Arctic. Eleanor, are there any cruise lines you recommend in the Arctic where you may see narwhal, beluga, etc.? Do you have any?
So I've been to the Arctic a few times, and I have never seen a narwhal whale. So I am desperate to see a narwhal whale, but I'm starting to think that a whale with a unicorn spike may be something of myth. But so I've never seen one. But northern Canada, I guess, northern Greenland is the places that you want to go for that. I do know people who've seen narwhal whales, so obviously they do exist. But Adventure Canada as a local specialist are very good up there. Quark have got a great program up there. Ponant, as we've already mentioned, AE. Get as north as you can in Canada, I think, for the best chance of seeing narwhals and belugas.
Yeah, because when I went on that Hapag-Lloyd Canadian Arctic and Greenland, some of the Inuit settlements that were quite up north, they had they I guess hunted narwhal, and they had the skeleton, if that's the right word for those. But we didn't see any. No. But it's interesting. I mean, like even early on in this last trip, we saw quite a lot of whales, and that was quite encouraging when we went to Grytviken, where they were talking about just thousands, 70,000 whales, something, and then the talk about just how rapidly the whale population is rebuilding, which is pretty exciting. So there's a couple of questions before we run out of time. There was a couple of questions on some packing bits, so I'll just pop those up. Larry's asking the question: can you bring telescoping metal hiking sticks on cruises? I'm guessing he's talking about Antarctic cruises, but maybe not. Do you need to pack and check luggage? Certainly, you can bring them on, and all the ones I've been on, but a lot of the cruise lines have them as well.
I check with your cruise line, but I also know hiking sticks, people like their own as well. But yes, you absolutely can take them. You will dip them in the disinfectant solution as you will dip your boots in, as well as anything that touches the ground. But yeah, absolutely, you can take them if you like your own. But yeah, if you're going with probably anyone mid-market and above, you might find they have them on board already. Anyway, I know Hapag-Lloyd, they even have them in a special cupboard in your cabin as well. So
right. Then the question just on the layers thing, Simon. I'm planning to use my Skiwear Plus under layers. I mean, that's the key thing, isn't it? Layers. In some of my other videos, Simon, you get to see me dressing and undressing, not completely, but I start with the underlayer. But I mean, you're right, the layers. So I always wear the I guess long johns, as we call them, and then I would wear like sort of trousers over that, and like sort of a sweatshirt thing, and then layers, and then pretty much every cruise line give you the big jacket?
No, there is some that don't. You definitely need
Okay.
to check. It is actually interesting because there's been a bit of pushback more recently about people who obviously are, if you get a jacket every time you go, very often these jackets are brilliant when you're down, but when you come back, I mean, perhaps if you live in Canada, you might, and parts of America, you might get use of them. But yeah, it is worth checking. There are definitely cruise lines that don't include them. But in terms of Simon's question, skiing, basing your packing on what you would do for skiing is a great way to pack, because if it's blue sky and sunny, you might just need the parka jacket with a simple layer underneath. But just like skiing, if the wind gets up and a whiteout comes down, then it gets cold and windy very quickly. So yeah, layers is and basing it on skiing is a great way to pack.
But I mean, your point is a good one, Martin. I think the cruise line probably should look at that whole parka situation, because whilst it's very nice getting a brand new parka, but I've been on like an Arctic, and even on Silver Sea alone, I've been on 2 Antarctics and an Arctic, and every time they've given me a brand new parka, the first time I excitedly brought it back, and it sat in here in a cupboard until eventually it did a bit clear out, and then we basically, like, it's got Silver Sea written over it, so we kind of basically pretty much dumped it. I haven't taken them back. So I feel like on Hapag-Lloyd, they gave you one, but you didn't keep it. I can't remember, but it just feels like they're fantastic, but I'm not sure you really need to.
I strongly recommend, if you get given a parka jacket by a cruise line, and it's a gift, it's not obviously if it's on loan you need to give it back, but if you get given or gifted a parka jacket by the cruise line and you're not going to wear it again, give it to them back. Give it back to them before you get off the ship. Partly because they can use them elsewhere. So I know that some of the cruise lines give them to, say, local schools in Ushuaia, or I know that I've seen some agencies that have gear rental. They will take them to rent them basically out to future people. But even if they're not part of that program, I think that giving them back to the cruise line, shows that actually, that you need to do something with this and do something with it responsibly. Whereas, yes, you're right, you bring it back in your suitcase if you've got space, and then if it sits in your cupboard and it's just going to be disposed of, that is a waste. So
exactly.
And
like Rosemary was saying around, like Rose, because I was mentioning earlier, Rosemary, before we were talking, like Rosemary has been on, like she's saying she's been on 10 different, she's been on 10 expeditions, got 10 different jackets, and it's like it seems crazy, like they keep doing that. So we have charged through. I think we've answered pretty much all of the questions. We didn't get to answer any of the non-expedition questions, but next week I will be back next week and I can answer the non-expedition ones. Martin, thanks so much for joining. Just to remind everybody, so it's from Polaroids. I've left a link in the description here. Just a reminder, I'm just going to bring a few bits up. So whoops, it helps if I bring the right thing up. There's a video which Martin helped me with working, which is live on the channel now, which is, I think it's called Antarctica for Less Without Going Broke. It gives you some tips on how to overall manage and get the price of expedition cruising to Antarctica down. Then also there is that download, which again, I've put a link there. It's tipsfortravels.com/polar, which Martin worked on very kindly. And it looks at those 21 lines. It looks at the ships. You'll see it's got all sorts of things like rating from luxury, adventure. Do they have solar cabins? Do they have solar sharing? How many people in the expedition team? Facilities, lead prices, etc., etc. And then also on there's the details of Martin's of Polaroids there, which I guess is also important. I should probably mention is although you're UK based, you can do bookings for US, and can you do Canada as well? Or yeah. And so you've got a number there on the document there with that, so that's great. So Martin, thanks so much for joining. I really appreciate you giving up your time. Hope people are saying they found it very helpful, so that's great. So thanks very much again, everybody, for joining, and thanks very much, Martin.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks.